Victoria Hale slammed her hand against the marble nightstand so hard the champagne glass shattered. She didn't scream. CEOs don't scream. She just sat there, half-dressed, in a penthouse that wasn't hers, staring at a man she barely remembered, sleeping beside her like he belonged there. 43 years of iron discipline, gone. One night, no memory. And the worst part? When he opened his eyes and looked at her, there was no panic in his face. Just something quieter, something that scared her more than any boardroom ever had. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because this one, you won't want to miss a single part. The first thing Victoria Hale registered was pain. Not emotional pain. She had buried that particular talent years ago. This was physical. A drumbeat behind her eyes so savage it felt like punishment. Like her own skull had decided to file a formal complaint. She didn't move right away. She had learned, somewhere between her first hostile takeover and her third magazine cover, that stillness was power. That the person who moved first in any room was the person who had already lost. So she lay there, eyes open, ceiling unfamiliar. The morning light bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows like an accusation. Where am I? Not a question. A command. Her brain issuing orders to itself the way it issued orders to a boardroom full of senior executives. Assess, locate, control. The sheets were expensive. She could tell by the thread count against her skin. Egyptian cotton. The kind of detail that cost 4 figures per set. She was still in her dress, or most of it. One heel was on the carpet beside the bed. The other was nowhere she could see. She turned her head. Slowly. And that was when the morning stopped being about physical pain. He was lying on top of the covers, fully dressed, minus his jacket and tie, with one arm folded under his head and the other resting across his stomach, like a man who had simply fallen asleep mid-thought. Dark hair, strong jaw, carrying a few days of stubble. Somewhere in his mid-40s, maybe. Broad shoulders that suggested he actually used his body for something other than sitting in climate-controlled offices. He wasn't what she expected to find in a penthouse suite. No, he wasn't what she expected to find anywhere near her life. Victoria sat up. Too fast. The room tilted, and she pressed 2 fingers against her temple and breathed through it until the world decided to hold still. Think. Meh. She remembered the gala, the Hartwell Foundation charity event on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Grand Hotel. She remembered the investors, their faces, their handshakes, their carefully constructed compliments that were really just thinly veiled requests. She remembered Marcus Doyle, her board chair, cornering her near the bar and saying things she didn't want to think about right now. She remembered champagne, several glasses, which was 3 more than she usually allowed herself. And then, nothing. A gap. Clean and absolute, like a page torn from a book. Whatever had happened after a certain point last night simply did not exist inside her memory anymore. She looked at the man beside her again. Who are you? As if he heard it, his eyes opened. Not startled, not guilty, just awake. Brown eyes, steady and clear in the way that people's eyes sometimes were when they had spent a long time learning not to panic. He looked at the ceiling first, then at the room, then at her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then he said very quietly, "I was hoping this was a dream." "It's not," Victoria said. "Yeah," he exhaled, rubbed a hand across his face. "I figured." He sat up slowly, and she noticed him wince, his own headache clearly making itself known, and he pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes for a moment before dropping them. "You remember last night?" he asked. "No," she said. The word came out like a verdict. "Me neither." He paused. Well, pieces. Not the important parts. Victoria stood, her legs held, which she considered a minor victory. She walked to the window because she needed something to look at that wasn't him, and the city spread out below her 40 floors down, indifferent and enormous, and already fully awake. "What's your name?" she asked. A beat of silence. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Walker." Another pause. "You don't remember that either." "I remember you were at the gala," she said carefully. "Event staff. Contractor," he said. Not defensive, just precise. "I run a small AV and logistics company. My crew handled the technical setup for the event." She turned to look at him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed now, elbows on his knees, studying the carpet with the expression of a man running calculations he didn't have enough variables to complete. "Ethan Walker," she repeated. "I'm Victoria Hale." "I know who you are," he said quietly. Of course he did. Everyone knew who she was. "Do you know what happened last night?" she asked. "I know we talked," he said. "Outside, on the terrace. You were—" He stopped, chose his words. "You needed some air." "I needed some air," she repeated, hearing the flatness in her own voice. "That's your version. That's what I remember." He looked up at her then, and there was something in his expression that wasn't embarrassment and wasn't accusation. Something more complicated than either. "You were upset. I don't know about what. You didn't say exactly, and I didn't push. But you stayed. You asked me to." The words landed somewhere she hadn't expected them to land. Victoria turned back to the window. Outside, a taxicab cut across 3 lanes of traffic, and someone on the sidewalk raised a hand in fury, and the city swallowed all of it whole without blinking. "My phone," she said. "On the nightstand, left side." She crossed to it. The screen was a disaster. 47 missed calls, a cascade of texts, and a single email from her assistant with a subject line that read, "Urgent. Please call me before 8 a.m. It was 8:23. She called. Her assistant, Dana, picked up on the first ring with the careful voice of someone who has been awake for 3 hours managing a situation they were not supposed to be managing. "Victoria, thank God. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Victoria said. Standard, automatic. "What's happening?" "There's—" Dana paused. The pause itself was alarming. Dana did not pause. "There are photos, Victoria, from last night. Someone posted them an hour ago. They're already being picked up." Pause. The room got very quiet. "What kind of photos?" Victoria said. "The elevator. You and someone. Close. And the rooftop. There's a rooftop photo. He's holding you. It looks—" Dana stopped. "It looks intimate, Victoria. That's the word they're using. Intimate." Victoria did not look at Ethan. She kept her eyes on the window. "Who's running with it?" she asked. TechPulse. They've got a headline. CEO Victoria Hale's secret night at Sterling Grand. They're implying— I understand what they're implying. The board is already in a group chat. I've seen 3 messages from Marcus Doyle in the last 20 minutes. Marcus. Of course. "Set a board call for 10 o'clock, Victoria said. "Tell them I'm aware and I'm handling it. Tell them nothing else." "And HR?" Dana asked carefully. "Because Thomas Reeves already sent an inquiry. He's asking about the identity of the man in the photos." Victoria finally looked at Ethan. He hadn't moved. He was watching her face with that same steady expression, reading the shape of the conversation from her half of it, and she could see the exact moment he understood what was happening. His jaw tightened, just slightly. "I'll call HR myself," Victoria said. "Thank you, Dana." She ended the call. The silence in the room had a different texture now, heavier, more specific. "There are photographs," she said. "I heard," Ethan said. "They're public. I figured that part too. They show us together, in a way that is going to require explanation." She paused. "Do you have an explanation?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I have the same blank space you have," he said. "And I have the same headache. And I have—" He stopped, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own phone, looked at the screen and went very still. "I have 14 missed calls from my sister." Something shifted in his face. Not panic, more like a man who had just remembered something he should not have forgotten. "My daughter," he said, standing. The steadiness in his voice cracked slightly on those two words, and he was already pressing call before he finished the sentence. "She was with my sister last night. She's 6. I told her I'd be home by midnight." He turned away, the phone pressed to his ear, and Victoria heard his sister pick up, heard the distant sound of a child's voice, and Ethan's entire posture changed. His shoulders dropped. He pressed one hand flat against the wall and closed his eyes. "Hey, baby," he said, and his voice went somewhere entirely different. Softer, lower, like a different man using the same body. "I know, I'm sorry. I'm okay. I promise I'm okay. I'm coming home as soon as I can, all right? Is Aunt Jess taking care of you?" Victoria watched him. Bowery. She had sat across negotiating tables from senators. She had fired board members and dismantled companies, and made decisions that cost people livelihoods. She had learned to read people in the time it took to shake a hand. And something about watching this man talk to his daughter, with the morning light on his face and the wreckage of a night neither of them remembered all around them, told her something she wasn't prepared for. He was not a threat. He was not a scandal. He was a person, an actual, specific person, with a 6-year-old daughter and a headache and a night he couldn't account for. Just like her. He finished the call, turned back, and for a moment he just looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully decode, part exhaustion, part something else. "Her name is Sophie," he said, quietly, not explaining, just offering. "How old?" "6. She's—" He almost smiled. Almost. "She's the only thing I've done right in the last 4 years." Victoria didn't respond to that. She wasn't built for that kind of honesty in the morning, especially mornings like this one. "You need to go to her," she said. "I know. And I need to manage what's happening on my end." "I know that too." He picked up his jacket from the floor, started pulling it on. Then he stopped, halfway through the second sleeve, and looked at her. "Victoria." It was the first time he'd used her name. It landed differently than she expected. "What happened last night?" he said slowly. "I don't know what it was. I don't know what we did or didn't do, or what any of it means. But I want you to know." He paused. Chose. "I'm not going to make this harder for you. Whatever you need to say publicly. Whatever you need to do. I'm not—" He stopped again, shook his head slightly. "I'm not the kind of person who turns a bad night into leverage." She stared at him. "No one said things like that, not in her world. You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know what kind of person I am." He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle. "There's coffee," he said, nodding toward the side table where a room service cart had materialized at some point. Neither of them knew when. "It's probably cold, but it's there." And then he was gone. Victoria stood in the middle of the penthouse and listened to the door click shut. She stood there for a long time. Then she walked to the coffee, poured a cup, drank it cold without tasting it. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Doyle. Again. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled up the photo that was already spreading across 3 different platforms. Herself and Ethan in the hotel elevator, her head tilted toward his shoulder, his arm around her. Not possessive, not calculated. Just there. like a man who was simply not willing to let someone fall. She studied her own face in the photograph. She looked. And this was the part that disturbed her most. She looked like herself. Not the self she presented. Not the self she'd constructed over 20 years of deliberately curated public image. She looked like whoever she had been before any of that. Her phone rang again. HR director this time. She answered. "Thomas," she said. Her voice was back, completely. Every wall back in its place, every edge sharpened, every trace of whatever had flickered through her in the last 20 minutes sealed away behind glass where it belonged. "Victoria," Thomas said, "we need to talk about last night." "Yes," she said. "We do." "The man in the photographs. His name is Ethan Walker," she said. "He's a contractor, and I'll need everything on your desk by 9:30. A pause. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked. Victoria looked at the photograph one more time. At the woman in it, who looked like she was not falling, not crying, not performing, just held. "I'm always all right," she said. And she believed it. She always believed it. That was the part she hadn't examined yet. 3 floors below, in a rideshare heading back across the city, Ethan Walker stared out the window and thought about a woman he barely remembered. And a feeling he couldn't explain. Because the blank space in his memory wasn't just confusion. It was the first time in 4 years something had broken through. And that terrified him more than any photograph ever could. The board call started at exactly 10 o'clock, and by 10:03, Victoria already knew it was going to be the worst hour of her professional life. Not because of what they said, because of how they said it. Marcus Doyle had that voice, the one he reserved for situations where he had already made a decision and was simply performing the ritual of discussion. Low. Measured. The voice of a man who considered patience a weapon and used it accordingly. "We're not here to assign blame," Marcus said, which was exactly what someone said when blame had already been assigned. Victoria sat at the desk in her home office, back straight, face neutral, phone on speaker, while her fingers moved across her laptop keyboard, pulling up the photo that was now sitting at 4,000 shares and climbing. "Then what are we here for, Marcus?" she asked. "Clarity," he said. "The optics of this situation are significant." "The optics," she repeated. "Flat. You were photographed in a compromising position with an event contractor, a man who worked, under the umbrella of a vendor contract directly tied to Hale Technologies. That creates an implied power dynamic that our legal team is already losing sleep over." "A photograph in an elevator," Victoria said, "is not a compromising position." "The rooftop photograph is," Marcus said. And then he went quiet, letting that sentence do its work. Victoria did not respond immediately. She had learned that silence was almost always the correct answer when someone was trying to provoke a reaction. She let 3 full seconds pass before she spoke again. "I'm aware of the rooftop photograph," she said. "Then you understand why we need a statement. Something that gets ahead of this before the financial press picks it up. TechPulse already has it." "TechPulse is a rumor engine," Marcus said. "The Wall Street Journal is not, and I have it on good authority that someone at the Journal made 3 calls this morning." That was new information. Victoria filed it. "What kind of statement are you looking for?" she asked. "One that separates you from this man," Marcus said. And the way he said "this man," with that particular weight, that careful distance, told Victoria everything she needed to know about how the board saw Ethan Walker. Something professional, dignified. "We can frame it as a misunderstanding. You were unwell, someone assisted you. There was no relationship." "And if that's not entirely accurate?" Victoria said. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 beats too long. "Victoria," Marcus said slowly, "tell me it's accurate." "I told you," she said. I'm still establishing the facts. You don't remember. I remember enough. She didn't. But Marcus Doyle was not going to know that. Then let me be very direct, Marcus said, and the patience in his voice evaporated completely. The board meets Friday. There are 3 members who were already looking for a reason, any reason, to revisit the leadership structure. If you walk into that room without this resolved, cleanly, quietly, I cannot protect you. Victoria's fingers stopped on the keyboard. I don't recall asking for your protection, she said. No, Marcus said. You never do. That's historically been one of your more expensive habits. The call ended 5 minutes later, with nothing resolved and everything worse, which was increasingly how all conversations with Marcus Doyle concluded. Victoria sat for a moment in the silence of her office, and then she opened a new browser tab and typed a name. Ethan Walker, a V contractor, Chicago area. Mates, the results were thin, which told her something. In her world, thin digital presence either meant criminal history or genuine privacy. She clicked through what existed. A small business website, professionally plain, no photo. A LinkedIn profile, sparse but real. Former senior engineer at a mid-sized tech firm. Left 6 years ago. No explanation in the gaps that followed. A brief local news mention from 3 years back. A charity auction. Something about fundraising for a children's literacy program. She stared at the LinkedIn photo for a moment. It was the professional version of the man she'd seen that morning. Same steady eyes. No performance in the expression. Just a person presenting themselves as exactly what they were. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go. Then something, she couldn't explain why, made her answer. Victoria Hale, she said. Ms. Hale. A woman's voice, precise and careful. My name is Karen Solis. I'm the Deputy HR Director at Hale Technologies. Thomas Reeves asked me to reach out directly. We'd like to schedule a formal conversation regarding the events of last evening, with both parties present. Both parties, Victoria said. Yourself and Mr. Walker, yes. Victoria said nothing for a moment. The phrase both parties had a specific legal texture to it that she recognized from a decade of navigating corporate structure. On what grounds? She asked. Standard protocol, Karen said carefully. Whenever there is potential overlap between a personal situation and a professional relationship, particularly one involving a vendor contract, HR is required to conduct a review. I understand the policy, Victoria said. I wrote part of it. A beat. Yes, Karen said. We're aware of that. When? Victoria asked. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Both parties have been notified. Victoria paused. You've already contacted Mr. Walker. His information was on the vendor contract, Karen said. He confirmed availability an hour ago. Something tightened in Victoria's chest. Not anger exactly, something more complex than that. The idea of Ethan Walker sitting across from an HR inquiry because of a night neither of them could reconstruct felt wrong in a way she hadn't anticipated. Fine, Victoria said. 9 o'clock. She ended the call. Stood. Walked to the kitchen, poured coffee she didn't drink, stood at the counter for approximately 90 seconds, then picked up her phone and did something she almost immediately questioned. She texted the number Ethan had written on the hotel notepad that she had, without thinking about it, folded into her jacket pocket that morning. The text said, HR called. 9 a.m. tomorrow. You don't have to say anything that isn't true. Whoa. She stared at it for a moment after sending it. Then she put the phone face down on the counter and walked away from it. 11 minutes later, it buzzed. His reply was 4 words. I know. Thank you. And then, 3 seconds after that, a second message. Sophie says hi. She doesn't know who you are. It just seemed like something she'd want to say. Victoria read it twice. She did not know what to do with it. So she did what she always did with things she didn't know what to do with. She put it away, filed it somewhere inaccessible, went back to work. The problem with filing things in inaccessible places, she had learned over 43 years, was that they never actually stayed there. Ethan Walker spent the hours between leaving the hotel and picking up Sophie from his sister's apartment doing three things simultaneously: reassuring his sister Jess that he was not dead, not arrested, and not in the kind of trouble that required a lawyer, while also scrolling through the photos that had already reached his own phone via 3 different forwarding chains, and also trying to figure out how to feel about any of it. Jess was not making the first part easy. "I called you 11 times, she said, standing in the doorway of her apartment with Sophie on her hip and an expression that mixed genuine relief with genuine fury in proportions she hadn't yet decided on. 11 times, Ethan. After midnight. You didn't answer." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry. I thought something happened to you." "Something did happen to me," he said. "I just don't know what." Jess stared at him. Sophie reached out both arms toward her father, and Ethan took her immediately, held her against his chest, and she buried her face in his neck with the total uncomplicated trust of a child who has never once doubted that her parent will be there when she reaches. It hit him somewhere deep and physical. It always did. "Daddy smells weird," Sophie announced into his collar. "Daddy had a complicated night," he said. "What's complicated?" "It means confusing." "Oh." She considered this. "Like math?" "Exactly like math." Jess had not moved from the doorway. She was looking at her brother with an expression he knew well, the one she wore when she was deciding whether to push or wait. Jess had always been better at reading rooms than he was. It was one of the things that had kept them close after everything fell apart 4 years ago. "Come inside," she finally said. "I'll make eggs." Thence they sat in her kitchen. Sophie coloring at the table with a focus that suggested she took art extremely seriously, while Jess made scrambled eggs and Ethan told her what he could remember, which was less than he would have liked and more than he was comfortable with. He told her about the gala, about the setup running long, about being near the terrace when he saw a woman come outside who was clearly not okay in the way that powerful people were specifically not supposed to be not okay in public. "I should have just walked away," he said. "But you didn't," Jess said. "I didn't." "Because you never do." She put a plate in front of him. "That's not a criticism. It's just a fact about you." He pushed the eggs around. She was sitting on the terrace ledge, not dangerously, just alone, and she looked like someone who hadn't been allowed to be alone in a very long time, like the kind of alone that actually costs something. Jess sat down across from him. And then? And then we talked. For a while. I don't know how long. And then I think there was more champagne. And then... He stopped. "Then there's nothing until this morning." "Nothing." "Nothing useful." Jess looked at him steadily. "But you're in her hotel room in the morning." "Yes." "And there are photographs." "Yes." "And you..." She chose her next words carefully. "Do you think anything happened between you?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Sophie hummed to herself at the other end of the table. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. "I think," he said slowly, "that we were 2 people who needed something that night, and found it in the same place at the same time. And I think what that looked like from the outside is probably not what it was." "And what was it?" He looked at his daughter. "I don't know," he said. "That's the honest answer. I don't know." Jess reached across the table and covered his hand with hers for a moment. Then she pulled back and picked up her fork. "HR called me," Ethan said. Jess's fork stopped midway to her mouth. "Her company's HR," he clarified. "I'm on a vendor contract with Hale Technologies. They want a meeting tomorrow. Me and her. Together. That's not good, Jess said quietly. It's not great. Ethan, she set down the fork. The contract, if they pull it. I know. That's 40% of your quarterly revenue. I know, Jess. And Sophie's medical. I know. His voice came out harder than he intended. He dialed it back. I know. I've already run the numbers. I'll figure it out. Sophie looked up from her coloring. She had her mother's eyes, dark and attentive, and missing very little. Daddy, are you in trouble? No, baby, he said immediately, completely, no hesitation. She studied him for one long moment with the terrifying perceptiveness of a 6-year-old who had already learned that adults didn't always tell the truth when they were scared. Okay, she said finally, apparently deciding to accept this. She looked back at her drawing. I made you a picture. Yeah? His voice softened completely. What is it? Us, she said simply. At the park, with the ducks. Dean, he looked at the drawing. 2 figures, one large, one small, next to some shapes that were impressionistic at best, but clearly intended as ducks. And above it, in Sophie's careful 6-year-old letters, me and Daddy. He sat with that for a moment. Then he took his phone out and looked at the HR notification again. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Victoria Hale across a conference table. An HR director asking questions about a night neither of them could account for. And somewhere beneath all of that, beneath the logistics, the contract, the photographs, the board calls he could hear happening on the other side of this, even without being present for them. Beneath all of it was the fragment he kept returning to. He'd told her something last night. He could feel the shape of it without the words, the way you sometimes remembered the emotion of a dream without the dream itself. He had told her something true. And she had listened. He didn't know how he knew that. He just did. His phone buzzed. Her text. He read it twice. You don't have to say anything that isn't true. And felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Like a knot, releasing one coil at a time. He typed back 4 words and a second message about Sophie. And then he sat there wondering why he'd sent the second one, and decided it was because it was real. And real was the only currency he had left that was entirely his own. The next morning arrived the way bad mornings always did. Faster than you were ready for, slower than you wanted it to be over. Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn to the gala, freshly pressed, because it was the only suit he owned that was appropriate for a corporate building. He was aware of this in a way that sat uncomfortably somewhere below his sternum as he walked through the lobby of Hale Technologies' downtown office. A building of glass and deliberate architecture that communicated wealth as its primary purpose. The receptionist directed him to the 14th floor, Conference Room B. He was 2 minutes early. Victoria was already there. She was standing at the window. His read of her, in the 2 seconds before she turned, was that she was the kind of person who always knew when someone entered a room, and always chose whether to acknowledge it. She was choosing now. She turned at exactly the right moment. Not too fast, not too slow. She looked completely different than she had that morning in the penthouse. Different and exactly the same. The external version, the one the magazine covers showed, was fully assembled. Dark blazer, precise posture, every element of presentation locked in. But her eyes were doing something the magazine covers never caught. Mr. Walker, she said. Miss Hale, he said. They looked at each other across the conference table, and something happened in the air between them that neither of them acknowledged and both of them felt. Before they come in, Victoria said, keeping her voice level, professional, calibrated. I want to say something. Okay, he said. I reviewed your contract with our vendor relations team this morning, she said. The language that triggers an automatic review in situations like this. I want you to know that I intend to argue against applying it. The clause was designed for situations involving direct supervisory relationships. What we have is several layers removed from that. Ethan looked at her for a moment. You're trying to protect the contract. I'm trying to apply the policy correctly. Victoria. She stopped. Thank you, he said. Simply. Something moved across her face. She almost dismissed it. He could see the impulse. And then she didn't. Don't thank me yet, she said quietly. Marcus Doyle requested observer status in this meeting. I said no. He's going to try again. Who is Marcus Doyle to you? Ethan asked. Board chair, she said. 12 years. The kind of man who builds loyalty the way you build a wall, one brick at a time, until you can't see over it anymore. Ethan nodded slowly. Does he know what he's doing to you? He knows exactly what he's doing, she said. That's what makes him effective. The door opened. Yes, Karen Solis entered with Thomas Reeves, both in HR armor, professional and unreadable, and set folders on the table with the careful efficiency of people who had done this many times before and felt nothing about it. Thank you both for coming, Thomas said. I want to be clear that this is an informational meeting, not a disciplinary one. We're here to understand the timeline of events and assess any potential policy implications. Understood, Victoria said. Thomas looked at Ethan. Mr. Walker, can you walk us through last evening from your perspective? And Ethan did. Clearly, accurately. He described his crew's work on the event, the extended breakdown schedule, his presence near the terrace, the conversation with a woman who was visibly distressed. He didn't use Victoria's name, just a guest, and the subsequent hours that he described as honestly as he could, which meant acknowledging openly that his memory of them was incomplete. Incomplete how? Karen asked. I had more to drink than I typically would, he said. There are gaps. Significant gaps? From approximately midnight onward, he said. Yes. Thomas made a note. Then he looked at Victoria. Ms. Hale, can you confirm Mr. Walker's account? I can confirm what I remember, she said, which aligns with what Mr. Walker described. And the gaps? Also from approximately midnight, she said. Yes. Thomas and Karen exchanged a look that lasted less than a second. The photographs, Thomas said carefully, suggest a level of closeness between you both. In the elevator, on the rooftop. Are either of you prepared to characterize the nature of the interaction? Victoria said nothing for one beat. 2. Then Ethan spoke. Two people who needed to talk to someone, he said. Found each other in a place where neither of them expected to. Whatever happened after, neither of us can speak to it directly. But I can tell you what kind of person I am. And I can tell you that whatever that night was, it wasn't something either of us would be ashamed of in daylight. Thomas looked at him. Karen looked at Victoria. Victoria was looking at Ethan. And Ethan, for one unguarded moment, looked back at her with the expression of a man who has just said something true and is not entirely sure what to do with the fact that it came out that clearly. Thomas cleared his throat. We'll need to conduct some additional interviews with event staff, he said, and review the available photographic evidence. We'll have a preliminary finding within 48 hours. Fine, Victoria said. They stood. Extended handshakes. Karen and Thomas filed out. And then it was just the two of them again. Same as the morning before. Different city, different room, same impossible air between them. That was either very helpful or very damaging, Victoria said quietly. Probably both, Ethan said. She almost smiled. She stopped it, but almost. I have a board meeting Friday, she said. Marcus Doyle is going to use this. I know. He's going to make it about your contract, about your connection to the company. He's going to try to make you look like a liability. Ethan was quiet for a moment. What does he want? Ethan asked. He wants me distracted, she said. Off balance, questioning myself. He's been building a case for a leadership restructure for 2 years. This is the opening he's been waiting for. So what do you do? And she looked at him. And for just one moment, one unguarded fraction of a moment, something crossed her face that wasn't strategy, wasn't control, wasn't the assembled public version of Victoria Hale. It was a question she didn't have an answer to. I don't know yet, she said. And the fact that she admitted that, out loud to him, was more significant than either of them said anything about. Ethan picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, stood. For what it's worth, he said, I believed you. In that meeting, when you said you'd argue against the clause. You shouldn't believe people just because they say the right thing, she said. No, he agreed. But I believe people when they mean it. And you meant it. He walked to the door, stopped. My daughter asked this morning if you were okay, he said, not turning around. Victoria blinked. She doesn't know who I am. No, he said, but I mentioned I had an important meeting. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, tell them to be nice, Daddy. He looked back over his shoulder, and this time, the almost smile happened on his side. Thought you should know, he said. Someone out there is rooting for you. The door closed. Victoria stood alone in conference room B for a long moment. Then she sat back down at the table, opened her laptop, pulled up the document she'd been drafting since 5 that morning. The argument she intended to make Friday in front of a board that had already decided what it thought. She started typing. And somewhere in the back of her mind, underneath the strategy and the structure, and the iron-disciplined forward motion of a woman who had never once let anyone see her stumble, underneath all of it, was a voice she hadn't heard in a very long time. It sounded something like, you meant it. And the terrifying part was that it was right. The 48 hours HR promised stretched into 72, and in that time, the world did not hold still and wait for anyone's conclusions. By Thursday morning, the Wall Street Journal had run a 4-paragraph item in their business section, careful, legally hedged, but specific enough that every person who mattered in Victoria's industry read between the lines without difficulty. The headline was almost polite. Hale Technologies CEO faces internal review amid questions of vendor relationship. Almost. The word relationship was doing the kind of work that required no interpretation. Victoria read it at 5:15 in the morning standing in her kitchen, and her first emotion was not panic and not anger. It was a cold, clarifying fury, the kind she recognized as useful, the kind that had built her company in the first place. She called Dana. Dana answered in 2 rings. I saw it. Who talked? Victoria said. We don't know yet. Could be hotel staff. Could be someone on the vendor side. Could be someone in our own building. Could be Marcus, Victoria said. Dana was quiet for exactly 1 second. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Victoria, pull Marcus Doyle's communication logs for the last 72 hours. Everything that touched external channels. That requires a board authorization. Then get me one, Victoria said. Find me one board member who isn't in Marcus's pocket and get me an authorization by 8 o'clock. She ended the call, picked up her coffee, set it back down without drinking it. Her phone rang immediately. Number she didn't recognize. Chicago area code. She answered. Ms. Hale? A man's voice, smooth and unhurried in the way that lawyers and journalists shared, but nobody else did. My name is Paul Garrett. I'm a senior reporter with the Journal. I was hoping to speak with you directly before our follow-up piece runs tomorrow. Nay. Victoria felt the muscles in her jaw tighten. She kept her voice completely level. Mr. Garrett, she said, anything you'd like to know about Hale Technologies should go through our communications office. Of course, he said. This is more of a personal matter. Then it definitely goes through communications. The man in the photographs, Garrett said. And something about the way he said it, the lack of any pretense of transition, told her he had been doing this for a long time and had learned that the pause before a name was when people gave themselves away. Ethan Walker, former senior engineer at Meridian Tech Solutions, left 6 years ago under circumstances that were never fully disclosed. You're aware of that? Victoria said nothing. There were rumors at the time, Garrett continued calmly. Nothing that ever went to print, mostly because the company settled fast and quiet. But rumors have a long shelf life, Ms. Hale. And in the context of this story, there is no story, Victoria said. There's a narrative, Garrett said. Whether you help shape it is entirely up to you. She ended the call. Stood very still. Left 6 years ago under circumstances that were never fully disclosed. Yeah. She had a choice in the next 30 seconds. She knew it with complete clarity. She could file that information away, treat it the way she treated everything that came from sources with agendas, which was carefully and at arm's length. Or she could pull on the thread. She pulled up her laptop and typed 2 words into the search bar. Meridian Tech. Ethan Walker. What came back was, as the reporter had said, almost nothing. A press release from 6 years ago announcing his departure. Ethan Walker has left to pursue other opportunities. We wish him well. Which was the corporate equivalent of a tombstone with no dates. A LinkedIn connection request from someone named R. Kessler, Senior VP at Meridian, that Ethan had apparently never accepted. And one thing she almost missed. A comment thread on a tech industry forum, 3 years old, half of it deleted, in which someone with the username mtech_insider had written, "Anyone else remember the Walker situation? Guy tried to do the right thing and got buried for it." The thread ended there. The rest of the comments were gone. She sat back. Tried to do the right thing. She looked at her phone. His number was still in her recent contacts. It was 5:47 in the morning. May. She typed, "A reporter called me, asked about Meridian Tech. I thought you should know." She stared at it for 30 seconds. Then she sent it. His response came 11 minutes later, which told her he was already awake. How much does he know? She typed, "Enough to ask, not enough to print. Yet." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, "I'll explain. Not over text. Can we meet?" Victoria looked at her calendar. Board meeting Friday. HR findings due today. Marcus Doyle somewhere in the background pulling strings she couldn't see yet. She typed, "Today, noon. There's a coffee place on Wacker called Fielding's. Small, private." He sent back a single word. "Okay." She put the phone down and stood in her kitchen in the gray Thursday morning light and thought about the fact that she had just agreed to meet a man she barely remembered. In public, voluntarily, in the middle of the most professionally vulnerable week of her career, and that the decision had taken her approximately 4 seconds. She didn't examine that too closely. She had learned that some decisions collapsed under examination. Ethan was already at Fielding's when she arrived, which she hadn't expected. He had the look of a man who had also been awake since before sunrise, the particular quality of alertness that came not from rest, but from the absence of the option to rest. He had a coffee in front of him, and his hands wrapped around the cup, and he stood when she walked in, which was such an instinctive thing that she was fairly certain he didn't notice he'd done it. She sat across from him. Ordered nothing. Looked at him. "Meridian," she said. "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He did. And he told it the way people told things they had told before. Not rehearsed, but settled. The kind of story you've made your peace with even when the peace isn't entirely satisfying. Honestly, 6 years ago, he had been a senior engineer at Meridian Tech Solutions. Solid company, mid-size, aggressive growth trajectory. He had been good at his job. The kind of good that made other people want to be in the room with you when decisions were being made. And then he had found something. In the financial architecture of our primary defense contract, he said, there was a discrepancy. Not small, not a rounding error. We're talking about redirected funds, 7 figures, moving through subsidiary channels in a way that wasn't in any official filing. Victoria was very still. I reported it internally first, he said. My direct supervisor, then his supervisor, then the compliance office. He paused. And then, very quickly, it became clear that the compliance office already knew, and that the people above me already knew, and that the question was not what I'd found, but what I intended to do about it. They pushed back, Victoria said. They offered me a promotion, he said. And the way he said it, flat, without drama, was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. A significant one. New title, significant salary increase, and a very clear understanding that the position came with a particular kind of institutional loyalty. And you said no. I filed a formal report with the Department of Defense Contracting Oversight Office, he said. And 3 weeks later, I was escorted out of the building. The settlement agreement I signed included a non-disclosure clause covering all internal company matters during my employment. Which is why nothing went to print, Victoria said. Which is why nothing went to print, he confirmed. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Across the room, the coffee shop was getting busier. Morning commuters, laptop workers, people living their ordinary Thursday. And none of it touched the small radius of their table. And the defense contract issue? She asked. Quietly corrected, he said. The discrepancy was retroactively resolved in subsequent filings. Nobody went to prison. Nobody lost anything except me. You lost your career, she said. I lost a specific version of my career, he said carefully. The version where I stayed quiet. I built something else. A small AV company. A company I own completely, he said, where every decision is mine. Where I can look Sophie in the eye and tell her honestly that what I do matters. He paused. It's smaller, but it's clean. Victoria absorbed this. She did it with the focused efficiency of someone who processed information for a living, sorting, weighing, connecting. The reporter is going to use this, she said. I know. He's going to frame it as hidden history, unstable professional background, connect it to the photographs and imply a pattern of, I don't know, recklessness, poor judgment. I know, Ethan said again. Are you angry? She asked, genuinely curious. He thought about it. Really thought about it, which she had noticed was something he did. Actually considered questions instead of reflexively answering them. I'm tired, he said finally, of a story I did the right thing inside of being used as evidence that I'm the wrong kind of person. Something moved in Victoria's chest. She recognized it distantly. It had the texture of recognition. Marcus Doyle is going to have that story by this afternoon, she said, if he doesn't already. Will he use it in the board meeting? Without hesitation, Ethan nodded slowly. He looked down at his coffee, back up at her. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why are you here? He said. I understand you came to tell me about the reporter, but you could have done that by text, or through a lawyer, or not at all. He paused. Why are you here in person? Mom. The question sat there between them like something that had weight and temperature. Victoria was aware, with the precise, uncomfortable awareness of someone who had spent decades managing her own transparency, that the honest answer to that question was not a simple one. Because you deserved to hear it from me directly, she said. That's the professional answer, he said. Not accusing, just observing. She looked at him. Yes, she said. It is. Ben. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, and let it go. Because he was, she was learning, the kind of person who knew the difference between the door being closed and the door being locked. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Dana. She answered. HR findings are in, Dana said. Karen Solis just sent the document, Victoria. You need to read it before Marcus does. Send it to my phone. She stood, and Ethan stood with her again, that same instinctive thing, and she put one hand up briefly. I have to go. I know, he said. She stopped, looked at him one more time. Thank you for telling me about Meridian. Thank you for asking, he said, instead of just deciding. She left. The coffee she'd never ordered stayed sitting as an empty space at the table. The HR findings document was 14 pages, and Victoria read all of it in the car on the way back to the office, which required the kind of focus that normally took her 10 minutes to locate, and today arrived in 30 seconds, because the stakes had a way of doing that. The findings were, on balance, not as catastrophic as they could have been. The language was careful. Witnesses from the event confirmed that both parties appeared to be in a state of emotional distress by the later hours of the evening, that Mr. Walker's conduct had at all observed points been appropriate and considerate, and that the nature of the interaction was consistent with two individuals sharing a conversation of a personal nature, rather than anything that warranted disciplinary action. The clause requiring mandatory review due to vendor relationship was flagged as applicable but assessed as low risk, given the indirect nature of the contractual connection. Recommended action: voluntary separation of contact between the two parties for a period of 60 days, with a follow-up assessment. Victoria read the last paragraph twice. 60 days voluntary separation. She thought about a man sitting across a coffee table, telling her a story about the last 6 years of his life, with the calm dignity of someone who had long since stopped waiting for the world to apologize. She thought about a 6-year-old girl who sent greetings to strangers because it seemed like the thing she'd want to do. She thought about Marcus Doyle opening this document in approximately 20 minutes and looking for the weakness in it. Because there was always a weakness, and Marcus always found it. She called Dana. Get me a room. Conference A. 1 o'clock. Just me and Marcus. That's 2 hours before the board prep session. I know, Victoria said. I want to talk to him before the room fills up, before he has an audience. Dana paused. Victoria, are you sure? I'm sure, she said. Dana made the room. Marcus Doyle arrived at conference room A at 1 o'clock with the measured confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He was 61, silver-haired, and wore his authority the way expensive suits wore their lining. Invisible until you looked for it, and then impossible to miss. He sat. She sat. The room was empty of everyone else. You read the findings, she said. Not a question. I did, he said. And I think Thomas Reeves was very diplomatic, Marcus said, in his interpretation of the policy language. Thomas applied the policy correctly, Victoria said, which I know because I wrote the policy. Policies are written in the abstract, Marcus said. Situations are concrete. And the concrete situation is that our CEO was photographed in an intimate context with a man who has a documented history of professional instability and a non-disclosure agreement from a prior employer. Non-disclosures are standard practice, she said. Not when they involve federal contracting issues. There it was. The reporter had gotten to him. Or Marcus had gotten to the reporter. She wasn't sure yet which direction the information had traveled. Ethan Walker is not the story, Victoria said. He's part of it, Marcus said. Marcus. She looked at him directly. What do you actually want? He tilted his head slightly, like he was deciding how honest to be. The board has discussed, he said carefully, the possibility of a co-leadership model, bringing in a president-level officer to handle day-to-day operational decisions while you focus on vision and public representation. Victoria felt the room get very quiet. A co-leadership model, she said. It's a structure that many companies our size. It's a demotion, she said, with better vocabulary. Marcus didn't flinch. It's a protection strategy, for you and for the company. After a week like this one, this week is not a referendum on my capacity to lead this company, she said. Her voice was completely level. And I will not accept a restructure built on the foundation of a photograph and 48 hours of press speculation. The board meets tomorrow, Marcus said. I know when the board meets, she said. I'll be there, and I'll be there as CEO, in full standing, which is the same position I will be in when I walk out. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and then, and this was the thing about Marcus Doyle that had always made him formidable. He smiled, not unkindly, almost with something that looked like respect. You know what I've always admired about you, Victoria? He said. You never run. No, she said. I don't, even when you probably should. Especially then, she said. He stood, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door. There's one more thing, he said, stopping with his back half toward her. The reporter, Garrett, is running a follow-up piece on Mr. Walker, specifically about Meridian, specifically timed for tomorrow morning, before the board meeting. He paused. I didn't plant that story, Victoria. I want you to know that. She said nothing. But I'm also not going to stop it, he said. And he left. Victoria sat in the empty conference room for 30 seconds exactly. She counted them. Then she picked up her phone and called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. The piece about Meridian is running tomorrow morning, she said, before my board meeting. Someone timed it deliberately. A beat of silence. Okay, he said. His voice was steady. She had noticed this about him. That steadiness wasn't passivity. It was a choice he made, repeatedly, in real time. I want to do something, she said, and I need to ask you first. Ask. Let me get ahead of it, she said. Let me tell the board about Meridian myself. Tonight, before the piece runs. Framed correctly. You were a whistleblower. You were retaliated against. The settlement was coerced. That's the accurate story. Silence on his end. Longer this time. That story involves my NDA, he said carefully. NDAs don't cover factual information about federal contractor misconduct, she said. I had our legal team confirm it 30 minutes ago. You had your legal team. He stopped. How long have you been planning this? Since the parking garage, she said. Since Marcus told me the piece was coming. I've been working on it in my head since then. Victoria? His voice had something in it she couldn't entirely place. You don't have to do this. I know, she said. It might not even help. If the board is all ready. It might not help, she agreed. But it's the right thing to do. And that turns out to matter to me. Another silence. I'll send you what I can legally share, he said finally. About Meridian, the timeline, the documented sequence. Thank you. Victoria. Yes. A pause that was longer than any of the ones before it. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I need you to know. I don't regret that night. Whatever it was, whatever we did or didn't do. I don't regret being the person who stayed when someone needed someone to stay. She held the phone against her ear and looked at the empty conference table and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a name for yet. Something that had been sealed away for so long that its movement felt like a door opening in a room she had believed was a wall. I know you don't, she said quietly. That's the part I keep coming back to. She ended the call, picked up her laptop, opened the document she'd started the night before, and began writing the argument she was going to walk into tomorrow and make. Not for the board, not for the company, not for the photographs or the story or any of the external architecture of a week that had taken her apart piece by piece. For the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she was writing something true. All the way true. And somewhere across the city, Ethan Walker sat at his kitchen table after Sophie had gone to bed and pulled out the documentation he had carried for 6 years in a folder he never showed anyone. The timeline, the emails, the formal report he had filed, the response he had received, and began scanning it, page by careful page, to send to a woman he had known for 3 days. A woman who kept showing up when she didn't have to. A woman who, he was beginning to understand, had been sealed away from herself for so long that even she hadn't noticed the lock. He sent the files at 11:47 p.m. Her read receipt appeared at 11:48. She was still awake, still working, still fighting. He sat for a moment and thought about what it meant that the same quality he most recognized in her, the refusal to stop, was the same quality he had spent 6 years trying to reclaim in himself. Then he closed his laptop, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on Sophie. She was asleep with the drawing on the nightstand beside her, the one with the 2 figures and the impressionistic ducks and the careful letters, "Me and Daddy." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Tomorrow was going to be hard. But he had done hard before. And this time, for reasons he couldn't entirely explain, he didn't feel like he was doing it alone. Friday arrived without ceremony, the way days do when they've already decided what they're going to be, regardless of how you feel about it. Victoria was awake at 4:30. She hadn't slept more than 2 hours in any continuous stretch, but she had done something more valuable than sleep. She had prepared. Not the surface preparation of polished language and rehearsed responses, but the deeper kind. The kind where you strip away everything that isn't essential and look at what remains and decide whether you can defend it. What remained was this. She had run Hale Technologies for 11 years. She had grown it from a 40-person software firm into a company with 400 employees and contracts across 3 continents. She had made decisions that hurt people, and decisions that saved people, and decisions that no one would ever fully understand the weight of because she had carried that weight alone by design. She had sacrificed 2 relationships, 1 almost marriage, and approximately every version of a personal life that anyone had offered her. She had done all of this because she believed in what the company was building. And she was not going to let Marcus Doyle take it apart in 45 minutes because of a photograph. She dressed at 5 o'clock. The kind of deliberate dressing that is itself a statement. Dark, precise, nothing performative. She called Dana at 6. "Boardroom is ready," Dana said. Marcus arrived early. He's been in there for 20 minutes already. Who else? Judith Crane and Philip Osai are in. Robert Fitch is remote. The others are on their way. And Victoria knew all of them. Judith was a reliable vote. Pragmatic, unsentimental, cared about outcomes above optics. Philip she trusted 90% of the way, which in board terms was the same as trusting completely. Robert Fitch was Marcus's oldest ally on the board and had voted against her exactly once in 11 years, which meant he was consistent, if nothing else. "The journal piece," Victoria said. "Is it live?" A pause. "It went up at 6:02, Dana said quietly. Victoria closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "How bad?" "It's thorough," Dana said. "They have the Meridian timeline. They're framing it as a pattern of instability. It's not vicious, but it's specific. And they quote an anonymous source inside Hale Technologies describing the situation as..." Dana stopped. Dana. A CEO in personal crisis making decisions that prioritize an outside relationship over fiduciary responsibility. Victoria held the phone against her ear and breathed through it. Someone inside her own company. Not Marcus. Marcus operated at a level that was too visible for anonymous sourcing. Someone closer to the daily operations. Someone who had heard things. "Find out who talked," Victoria said, quietly, "after today." "Already started," Dana said. Victoria got in this car. The city slid past the windows in the early gray of a Friday morning, and she sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes forward and thought about Ethan Walker sending her documents at 11:47 the night before. She thought about what it had cost him to compile those files. To hold them for 6 years in a folder he showed no one. To hand them to a woman he had known for 3 days because she asked, and because he was the kind of person who believed that the right thing was worth doing even when it was expensive. Dumb. She pulled out her phone. Typed, "It's live. I've read it. I'm going in anyway." His response came in 4 minutes, which meant he was already awake and watching. "I know. I've seen it. Victoria, you don't have to use the Meridian material. This is already too much to ask." She typed back, "You didn't ask. I offered. There's a difference." She put the phone in her bag and walked into her own building.
Downsway.
The boardroom was on the 22nd floor, and by the time Victoria reached it at 8:45, every seat was filled. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, with the particular stillness of someone who had arranged the furniture of a room before anyone else arrived, and was now simply waiting to see how it played out. Judith Crane gave Victoria one sharp, precise nod when she entered. Philip Osei looked at her with an expression that was carefully blank, which from Philip was itself a form of communication. Robert Fitch, on the video screen at the end of the table, was already talking. "The timing of this piece is relevant," Robert was saying. "Whether or not the content is accurate, the fact that it runs the morning of a board meeting suggests coordination, which raises questions about the source." "The source is not our primary concern," Marcus said, without looking up from the document in front of him. "The content is." "I disagree," Victoria said, taking her seat. Every face in the room turned to her. "The source is exactly our primary concern. Because if the source is internal, we have a governance problem that is significantly larger than anything in that article." Marcus looked up. "Good morning, Victoria." Marcus. She opened her own folder. Let's begin. The first 20 minutes were what she had expected. A survey of the situation, a careful accounting of the public coverage, the HR findings reviewed with the kind of exhausted thoroughness that institutional processes demanded. Victoria answered every question directly and completely. She did not qualify. She did not deflect. She had learned long ago that defensiveness was its own form of evidence. Then Marcus said, "I'd like to address the subject of Mr. Walker's professional background." "I'd like to address it first," Victoria said. Marcus paused. A small pause, the kind that cost him something. "Go ahead," he said. Victoria looked around the table, at Judith, at Philip, at Robert's face on the screen. Ethan Walker left Meridian Tech Solutions 6 years ago after filing a formal report with Department of Defense contracting oversight regarding financial discrepancies in a federal contract worth approximately $40 million, she said. The discrepancies were subsequently corrected in Meridian's filings. Mr. Walker was asked to leave under the terms of a settlement agreement. He signed a non-disclosure clause that covered internal company matters. He did not and could not be silenced about the underlying federal matter. She paused. He was a whistleblower. What happened to him afterward was retaliation. The article this morning frames his history as instability. The accurate frame is integrity. The room was quiet. Judith Crane said, "How do you know this?" "He told me," Victoria said. "And I have documentation." "He told you," Marcus repeated, slowly, like he was tasting the words. "Yes," Victoria said. "During a conversation in which I informed him that a reporter had called me with questions about his past and asked him directly for the truth. He gave it to me." She looked at Marcus steadily. "People do that sometimes, Marcus. When you ask them directly, instead of building a case against them in the background." A beat of absolute silence. Philip Osei made a sound that was not quite a laugh and converted it immediately into a throat clear. Marcus set down his pen. "Victoria, the point of this meeting is not Ethan Walker's professional integrity. The point, Victoria said, is whether I am capable of leading this company. That is what you're asking. So, let me answer it directly. She stood, not dramatically, just because she thought better on her feet, and she needed to think very clearly right now. I had a night 2 weeks ago that I cannot fully account for. I was in a professional setting, I drank more than I should have, and I woke up the following morning in circumstances that were confusing and professionally inconvenient. I handled it. I cooperated fully with HR. I did not ask for special treatment. I did not leverage my position to make the situation go away. I faced it. She paused. That is the same thing I have done with every difficult situation this company has navigated for 11 years. And I will continue to do it. She sat back down. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The co-leadership proposal, he said, is still on the table. I know it is, she said, and my answer is the same as it was Wednesday. The board, Marcus started. Would like to vote, Judith Crane said, not loudly, just clearly. Marcus, I think we've heard what we need to hear. Let's vote. Marcus turned to look at Judith. Something moved in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of a man who has just discovered that the pieces on the board are not where he left them. Judith? Call the vote, Philip said. The vote on the co-leadership restructure was 5-2 against. Judith, Philip. 2 others Victoria had not been certain of. And, to her genuine surprise, Robert Fitch, who met her eyes through the video screen and gave a barely perceptible nod. Marcus voted yes, along with 1 other board member whose name Victoria committed to memory for future reference. The meeting ended at 10:43. The hall. Victoria walked out of the boardroom, through the corridor, into the elevator, and down to the lobby before she stopped. She stood in the lobby of her own building and took one long, slow breath and felt the week she had just survived settle into her body like weight releasing. Dana appeared at her elbow. You won. The vote went the way I needed, Victoria said. That's not the same thing as winning. It's close enough for a Friday, Dana said. Victoria almost smiled. Get me a coffee, real coffee, and then I need an hour alone. She used the hour to call Ethan. He answered immediately. How did it go? 5-2, she said. The restructure failed. A beat, then, Victoria. Don't congratulate me yet, she said. Marcus is not finished. He lost a vote. He didn't change his mind. And someone in my building talked to the Journal, which means I have a trust problem that's going to take months to untangle. But you're still CEO. I'm still CEO. She heard something on his end. A small sound, and then Sophie's voice in the background saying something she couldn't make out, and Ethan's voice responding, low and quick. Sorry, he said. She wanted a snack. She's decided that Fridays require waffles as a matter of principle. That's a reasonable position, Victoria said. I think so too. A pause. Victoria, the Meridian material. You used it. I did. And it worked, she said. Or part of why it worked. The framing mattered. Context always matters. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him moving. The sound of a kitchen, a plate being set down. Thank you, he said finally, for telling the true version. It was the accurate version, she said. Those aren't always the same thing. In this case, they were. Another silence, but a different kind. Not uncomfortable, just inhabited. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Yes. The night at the gala, when you found me on the terrace. She paused, choosing precisely. What was I saying? When you first came outside, what were the first words you heard? A long pause. You were talking to yourself, he said. Or you thought you were. You didn't hear me come out. He paused again. You said, I don't know who I am when no one's watching. The lobby of her building was busy around her, people moving through, conversations happening, and none of it reached her. That's what I said, she said quietly. Yes. And what did you do? I sat down next to you, he said. And I said, nothing, for a while, because it seemed like the wrong moment for words. She sat with that. And then? She asked. And then you noticed me. And you said, you're not supposed to be out here. And I said, neither are you. And you laughed. He paused. It was the first time I'd heard you laugh. It was... He stopped. It was what? She said. It was the realest thing I'd heard all night, he said simply. Victoria stood in the lobby of the company she had built over 11 years and felt something happen in her chest that she recognized, distantly, as the sensation of a person realizing they have been hungry for something for a very long time without knowing what it was. I have a problem, she said. What kind? The HR recommendation is 60 days voluntary separation, she said. No contact between us. A pause. I know, he said. I read the findings. And? She said. And I think the HR department is doing its job, he said. And I think 60 days is 60 days. That's all you have to say about it? No, he said. But the rest of it I'd rather say in person. If that's... He stopped. If that's something you want. Victoria looked at the front doors of her building. Through the glass, the city was doing its ordinary Friday things. Traffic, pedestrians, the relentless, indifferent forward motion of a place that did not slow down for anyone's personal revelations. The HR recommendation is voluntary, she said. It's not binding. I know that too, he said. Ethan? Yes. I don't know what I'm doing, she said. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that would have been unthinkable to her 14 days ago, was that she said it without any of the armor. Just the sentence, just the truth of it. Neither do I, he said. For what it's worth. It's worth something, she said. Yeah, he said quietly. I think so too. Yeah. She ended the call, stood for another moment. Then she went back upstairs because there was work to do, and a company to run, and a trust problem to untangle, and a board member's name she had committed to memory that required attention. But the afternoon had a different quality to it now, like a room that had been aired out, like a thing that had been sealed for too long had finally been allowed to breathe. She was in her office at 3:15 when Dana knocked and entered with the expression she used for delivering information that required handling. What? Victoria said. The anonymous source in the journal piece, Dana said. She set a single sheet of paper on the desk. Communications traced the information pathway. It came from someone in vendor relations. Someone who had access to the HR inquiry documentation before it was officially filed. Sigh. Victoria looked at the name on the paper. She knew it. A mid-level manager. Someone she had promoted 2 years ago based on a strong recommendation from Marcus Doyle. She sat with that for exactly 5 seconds. Pull his access credentials, she said. Quietly today. I want an HR conversation scheduled for Monday morning. Done, Dana said, and then she paused at the door. Victoria, for what it's worth. You were remarkable in there today. Victoria looked up. Dana was not the kind of person who said things like that. She was precise and efficient and deeply loyal in the way of people who showed love through competence rather than sentiment. Thank you, Victoria said. Dana left. Victoria turned back to her computer. She had emails to answer, a statement to craft for the communications team, a follow-up call with legal about the Meridian documentation, and approximately 40 other things that required her complete attention. She opened her email, and before she did any of it, she did one thing first. She pulled up the HR findings document, found the paragraph about the 60-day voluntary separation recommendation, read it once. Then she opened a new document and began typing. Not a legal response, not a strategy memo, a letter. To the HR department, formally acknowledging the recommendation and formally declining to implement it, with documented reasoning that she had spent the previous 14 days reviewing and could now articulate with complete clarity. She wasn't declining because the policy was wrong. Nay, she was declining because the policy had been written for situations where power was the organizing principle of an interaction. And whatever she and Ethan Walker were, whatever the night she couldn't remember had begun and the days she absolutely could remember had continued, power had nothing to do with it. He had sat beside her on a terrace when she didn't know anyone was there. He had stayed because she asked. He had told the truth in an HR room when lying would have been easier. He had sent her 6 years of documented integrity at midnight and asked nothing in return. And she had walked into a board meeting and named him correctly when it cost her something. That was not a power dynamic. That was two people being honest in a world that made honesty expensive. She finished the letter, reviewed it once, sent it to Thomas Reeves. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the city through her office window and thought about a drawing of two figures and some impressionistic ducks and the words "me and Datey" in careful 6-year-old letters. She thought about what it meant that the most real conversation she'd had in years had started on a terrace where she thought no one was watching. She thought about the question that had started all of this. What happened between us? And realized that it had quietly changed shape over the course of 2 weeks. The question wasn't what happened anymore. The question was what came next. And for the first time in longer than she wanted to count, the uncertainty of that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door. She picked up her phone, typed a message to Ethan. I declined the 60-day recommendation. Formally. In writing. She watched the 3 dots appear almost immediately. Disappear. Appear again. Then, I know. Thomas Reeves just called me. He wanted to confirm you'd made that decision voluntarily. She typed, and what did you tell him? His response arrived in 11 seconds. I told him that in my experience, Victoria Hale doesn't do anything involuntarily. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face up on her desk, which was different from face down, which was the thing she had been doing all week, and went back to work. The phone stayed where she could see it. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. The weekend after the board meeting was the quietest 2 days Victoria had experienced in 11 years. Not peaceful, quiet in the way that follows a storm, when everything that was loose has either been secured or carried away, and what remains is just the landscape of what survived. She spent Saturday morning on the phone with legal, working through the implications of the Meridian documentation she had used in the board meeting. The attorneys were cautious in the way attorneys always were, mapping the exposure, calculating the risk, building the argument for why doing the right thing had been, coincidentally, also the legally defensible thing. She listened to all of it, answered their questions, signed what needed signing. Then she hung up and sat in her apartment in the Saturday quiet and realized she hadn't eaten since Thursday evening. She made toast, sat at her kitchen counter, ate it standing up because sitting felt like too much of a concession to stillness. Her phone was face up on the counter. She had started doing that, the face up thing. She noticed it every time and still didn't change it. At 11:15 it buzzed. Ethan. Not a text, a call. She answered. Good morning. Good morning. His voice had the texture of someone who had also slept in pieces. How are you doing, actually? I'm eating toast, she said, which I think counts as progress. It absolutely counts as progress, he said seriously. And then, I'm taking Sophie to the park, the one with the ducks. She's been asking about it all week, and I keep finding reasons to delay. And this morning she looked at me and said, Daddy, the ducks are not going to wait forever. So, a pause. We're going. Victoria felt something move through her. Light, unexpected, the kind of feeling that arrives without announcing itself and leaves you slightly off balance. That's good advice, she said, from Sophie. She's usually right, he said, about most things. And then, carefully, I wanted to ask you something, and you can say no, easily, without explanation. Victoria set down her toast. Ask. Come to the park, he said. Not as anything specific, just come to the park. It's Saturday. You just survived the worst week of your professional career, and my daughter thinks the ducks are urgent. And I think... He stopped, started again. I think you've spent enough time this week in rooms where everything you said was being evaluated. I thought you might want to spend an hour somewhere that doesn't work like that. Victoria looked at the toast on the counter, at the empty apartment around her, at the face-up phone in her hand. She thought about all the reasons this was complicated. The HR letter she'd filed, the board dynamics, the journal piece still sitting in the search results with her name in the headline, the way Marcus Doyle would interpret any public appearance involving Ethan Walker, the optics, the exposure, the risk calculation that her brain ran automatically and continuously, like background software she'd never managed to disable. She thought about all of that. Then she said, "What park?" he told her. She wrote it down. They agreed on noon. She changed out of the clothes she'd been wearing since yesterday morning and left her apartment, and the fact that she did it without consulting a single person, without calling Dana, without running it past legal, without performing the usual 12-step internal review process, felt like the most radical thing she had done in a week full of radical things. She arrived at the park 12 minutes late because she stopped on the way and bought a coffee she didn't need, which she recognized as stalling behavior, and did anyway. She heard Sophie before she saw them. Not screaming, just talking. With the particular volume of a child who has not yet learned that the world is not automatically interested in everything she has to say, and who would be somewhat correct in that assumption, because everything she was saying was, in fact, interesting. They have a baby, Sophie was explaining to Ethan, completely seriously. See that one? That's the baby. The baby doesn't know how to get the bread yet. The baby needs practice. You're right, Ethan said. The baby needs practice. Maybe we should give the baby extra. That seems fair. Daddy, look. She found it. She found the bread. Did you see? I saw. I told you she just needed practice. Victoria stopped a few feet away and watched this exchange with the expression of someone who has just encountered a frequency they forgot existed. Ethan looked up. Their eyes met. He didn't say anything. He just moved slightly to the left on the bench, making space, and tilted his head in a way that was not quite an invitation and not quite a question, but somewhere precise between the two. She sat down. Sophie turned immediately. She looked at Victoria with the direct, unself-conscious assessment of a child performing a social evaluation without any of the social filters that adults spent their whole lives constructing. Hi, she said. Hi, Victoria said. Are you Daddy's friend? Victoria glanced at Ethan. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has decided to be amused by a situation rather than anxious about it, which she was beginning to understand was his primary coping mechanism, and also, possibly, a form of wisdom. Yes, Victoria said. I'm your daddy's friend. Sophie considered this with complete seriousness. Then she held out the bag of bread. Do you want to help feed the baby duck? She's still learning. Victoria took a piece of bread. I'd like that. They sat at the edge of the water for 40 minutes. Sophie narrated everything. The ducks, the bread distribution strategy, a theory she had about why the biggest duck was probably the dad, a concern she had about a goose on the other side of the pond that was, in her assessment, being rude. Ethan listened and responded, and occasionally caught Victoria's eye over Sophie's head, with an expression that said, without words, "This is my whole life, and I know exactly how lucky I am." Victoria fed bread to the baby duck. She listened to Sophie's running commentary. And somewhere in the middle of it, the week she had just lived, the photographs, the board meeting, Marcus Doyle's careful voice, the journal headline, the HR letters, all of it, moved to a distance she hadn't known it could reach. Not gone, just proportioned correctly, for the first time. When Sophie ran ahead to look at something near the water's edge, Ethan said quietly, "You okay?" "Yes," Victoria said. And then, because it was true, more than I expected to be. He nodded, watched Sophie for a moment. "I owe you an honest conversation," he said, "about what I want, if you're open to having it." "I'm open," she said. He turned to look at her directly. The way he did things, with that particular quality of attention that didn't perform itself, that just was, had the effect of making everything else temporarily irrelevant. "I haven't let myself want something for myself in 4 years," he said. "Every decision I've made since Claire left has been structured around Sophie. Her stability, her school, her health, her sense that the world is safe and consistent. That was right. That was what she needed, and I don't regret a single day of it." He paused. "But I am aware that at some point, not far from now, she's going to be old enough to notice that her father has arranged his life so that there's no room in it for anything that might hurt him. And I don't want her to learn that from me. That fear is a reasonable organizing principle for a life." Victoria was quiet. "She asked me this morning," he said, "while she was eating her waffles. She asked if you were going to come to the park because she wanted to share her ducks. She doesn't know anything. She just—" He stopped. "She just knew that something was different this week, and Sophie has always moved toward different things instead of away from them." "She gets that from you," Victoria said. He looked at her. "The way you moved toward me on that terrace," she said. "You didn't have to. Most people would have walked the other direction. I was clearly complicated and probably embarrassing and entirely someone else's problem." She paused. "You sat down." "Yeah," he said simply. "Why?" she asked. He thought about it. Really thought, in the way she had learned to wait for. "Because you looked like someone who had been performing for so long, they'd forgotten there was a stage," he said. "And I know what that costs. I spent 6 years at a company where the performance was the job, where what you said in public and what you knew in private had to be maintained as two completely separate things." He paused. "When I finally stopped, when I filed that report and walked out, the thing that surprised me most wasn't the retaliation. It was how light I felt, even losing everything. Because at least what I was carrying was real." Victoria looked at the water. "I have been performing," she said, "for so long that I'm not always sure which version is the performance." "I know," he said. "I saw both versions, that night and since. And for what it's worth," he paused, "the version that talked to herself on a terrace thinking no one was listening, that's the one I kept coming back to." Something cracked open in her chest, quietly, without drama, just open. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Whatever this is, I don't have a template for it. My entire life is structured around certainty and control, and I walked into a situation 2 weeks ago that had neither of those things, and I have been—" She stopped. "I have been less myself and more myself simultaneously, and I do not have a framework for that." "Neither do I," he said. "But I've learned that most things worth doing don't come with frameworks." He paused. "They just come with a choice. Do you want to try or not?" She looked at him. "And if I'm bad at it?" she said. "Then you're bad at it," he said. "And we figure it out. That's what people do." Sophie came running back at that exact moment, breathless and delighted, with the news that the goose had stopped being rude and was now eating peacefully with everyone else, which she considered a significant diplomatic development. "I think he just needed to feel included," she announced. Ethan caught Victoria's eye. Victoria looked at this 6-year-old person with her father's steady eyes and her absolute confidence in the idea that most problems had solutions if you paid attention to them. "I think you're probably right," Victoria said. Sophie beamed. And then she took Victoria's hand, completely without preamble, without asking, the way children claimed things they had decided belonged to them, and pulled her toward the water to see the reformed goose. Victoria let herself be pulled. That was the moment. Not the board meeting, not the HR letter, not the text messages or the coffee at Fielding's or the conversation in the park. This was the moment, being pulled toward a pond by a 6-year-old who had decided without any evidence that Victoria Hale was trustworthy. When something that had been sealed for a very long time finally opened all the way. She didn't cry. She was not, and had never been, a person who cried easily. But something in her eyes went soft in a way that Ethan noticed from the bench and looked away from quickly, because he was, she was learning, the kind of man who understood that some things needed to be witnessed privately. The 3 weeks that followed were not simple. Simplicity was not, Victoria had come to accept, a condition available to her life. Marcus Doyle filed a formal board motion calling for a governance review, a more procedural attack than the co-leadership proposal, and for that reason, more dangerous, because procedure was harder to argue against than personality. Victoria spent 4 days working with legal and with 2 board allies to construct a response that was airtight. It was the most technically demanding piece of strategic work she had done in years, and she did it while also managing the quarterly earnings call and a significant contract negotiation with a European partner. DT. She was good at it. She was reminded, genuinely good at her job. The governance review motion failed by 1 vote. Marcus called her afterward. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You're more resilient than I calculated." "I know," she said. "That's not a compliment," he said. "I know that too," she said. The call ended. She sat in her office at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening and texted Ethan. Motion failed. 1 vote. He responded, "I know." Dana texted Jess, who texted me, "Your assistant is terrifying." She laughed, out loud, alone in her office at 7:30 on a Tuesday. She sat with the sound of it for a moment, like something unfamiliar she was learning the shape of. The Journal ran 1 more piece, a follow-up that, in the way of follow-up pieces when the primary narrative has been complicated by facts, was considerably less certain in its framing than the first. Paul Garrett, to his credit, or his editor's caution, had included a paragraph acknowledging that the Meridian situation involved a formal federal report and a settlement that legal experts described as consistent with whistleblower retaliation. The framing of professional instability had been quietly retired. Ethan texted her when it ran. They got it right, or closer to right. She texted back, "Right is a process." He sent back a single laughing emoji, and then, "Sophie says that's something a CEO would say." She sent back, "Tell Sophie she's correct." 3 weeks after the park, they had dinner. An actual dinner, a restaurant, a table for 2, no agenda items, no strategy documents, no professional purpose. Just 2 people, and food, and the particular conversation that happens when you have already seen each other in crisis and decided you can also see each other in ordinary life. Victoria arrived first. She was always early. She had stopped apologizing for it. Ethan arrived 2 minutes later. He was, she was learning, reliably slightly late in the way of people who are always trying to squeeze one more thing into the time they have. He sat across from her and looked at her for a moment the way he did, that direct, unhurried, unperforming attention, and said, "You look different." "Different how?" she said. "Like someone who slept," he said. "I did sleep," she said. 7 hours. Consecutive. "That's practically a miracle for you. Don't push it," she said. But she was almost smiling. They ordered. They talked. They disagreed about 3 things. The correct approach to managing board dynamics, whether Sophie's theory about the dad duck was actually accurate, and whether it was possible to like the taste of cilantro, and agreed about considerably more. And somewhere between the main course and the coffee, Ethan set down his fork and looked at her and said, "Can I tell you something?" "Yes," she said. "I remember something from that night," he said. "The night at the hotel. Something I didn't tell you before." The table went very quiet. "I remember being on the rooftop," he said. "Not clearly, but I remember being there, and I remember you saying something." He paused. "You said, 'I'm so tired of being the person no one is allowed to see.'" Victoria held very still. "And I said," he paused, chose carefully, "I see you." She looked at him across the table. "That's what I said," he confirmed, "and I meant it, even then, even not knowing you." She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking it. "I believe you," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "That's the thing. You believe me. And you're not—" He stopped. "You're not used to believing people. I can see it every time you do it, like a muscle you forgot you had." "You say a lot of true things," she said. "Has anyone ever told you that's occasionally uncomfortable?" "Jess mentions it regularly," he said. "Smart woman. She'd like you," he said. "She already does, based on available evidence. Which is terrifying because Jess doesn't like most people." Victoria looked at this man across a restaurant table. This man who had sat beside her on a terrace when she thought no one was watching, who had told the truth in an HR room when lying was easier, who had sent her 6 years of carefully documented integrity at midnight, who had taken her to a park where a 6-year-old had claimed her hand without hesitation, and she felt something she recognized clearly and had no interest in qualifying. "I want to try," she said. "Properly, not carefully, not with an exit strategy already in place." He looked at her. "That's a significant statement for you," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm aware." "What changed?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way he had taught her, by accident, by example, to think about things. "Sophie pulled me toward the ducks," she said, "and I let her." "Matui." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved in his face that was private and complete and entirely his. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay," she said. "That's it?" he said. "No terms? No conditions? No performance metrics?" "I'm working on it," she said. He laughed, really laughed, the kind that arrives without permission. And she felt it land somewhere in her chest, like something she had been waiting for, without knowing she was waiting. 6 months after the night neither of them remembered, the photographs were still technically searchable if you knew where to look. The journal article existed in the archive. The HR file sat in a system somewhere with her name and his name, and the language of institutional process wrapped around something that had been, at its core, 2 people on a terrace deciding not to be alone. Marcus Doyle remained on the board. He was too structural to remove cleanly, and Victoria had long since made her peace with the fact that some battles were maintenance, not resolution. She managed him the way you managed weather, with preparation and without illusion. The vendor contract with Ethan's company was dissolved by mutual agreement and rebuilt through an independent third-party channel that removed any remaining policy ambiguity. It cost both of them some administrative inconvenience and cost Ethan 3 weeks of paperwork. He handled it without complaint. Sophie turned 7 in November. Her birthday party was at a park. A different park, no ducks, but there was a dog that belonged to another family, and Sophie befriended it within 4 minutes, which Ethan said was exactly on schedule. Victoria attended the birthday party. She stood at the age of it at first, the way she stood at the edge of most rooms, assessing. Watching Sophie move through her friends with the complete ease of a child who had been taught, by the quality of love around her, that she was worth knowing. Then Sophie spotted her and waved with her whole arm and shouted, "Victoria, the dog's name is Biscuit," across the park with a volume that suggested she considered this information urgent, and the edge of the room became unnecessary. Victoria walked in. That evening, after Sophie was home and asleep with a birthday crown still on the nightstand beside the duck drawing, Ethan sat on the front steps of his building. Victoria sat beside him. The November air was cold enough to matter, and neither of them moved to go inside. "She had a good day," Victoria said. "She always has a good day," he said. "She has a gift for it." "She has a gift for a lot of things," Victoria said. "She gets it from her father." He looked at her. She looked back, without armor, without the assembled public version or the performance or the distance she had maintained between herself and every person who had tried to get close for 20 years. Just her. Just him. Just the cold November air and the city making its ordinary sounds. "I said something to you that night," she said quietly. "On the terrace, that I didn't remember until you told me." "I know what you said," he said gently. "I meant it," she said. "I still mean it. And I need you to know—" She paused, choosing, because precision still mattered to her, and probably always would. "What you said back. I see you. That is the most significant thing anyone has said to me in the last 20 years. She paused. "And it was more accurate than I wanted it to be." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he reached over and covered her hand with his. Not dramatically, not as a gesture, just the way people touched when touch was the truest available language. And left it there. They sat like that while the November night settled in around them. The missing night had started it. The chaos and the photographs and the HR inquiry and the board meetings and the reporters and the weeks of navigating consequences. All of that had followed. None of it was small. None of it had been easy. But here, on the other side of all of it, what remained was also not small. It was just real. Completely, specifically, inconveniently, wonderfully real. And that was the thing about truth. The kind you stumble into on a terrace at midnight, thinking no one is watching. The kind you defend in a boardroom because it's accurate, and accuracy matters. The kind a 6-year-old delivers about ducks without knowing she's delivering anything at all. Truth doesn't ask permission to arrive. It doesn't apologize for its timing. It doesn't care about your exit strategy, or your professional exposure, or the 47 things on your calendar. It just waits. And when you finally stop running long enough to turn around, there it is. Exactly where it always was. Right beside you.